Welcome to the Outthinker podcast. Each week, we talk with forward-looking strategists and innovators that are challenging the status quo, leading the future of business, and shaping our world. I'm your host, Kyan Krippendorf, founder of the Outthinker Strategy Network.
Strategy for me is not just deciding what to do, but also what not to do. And ultimately, if you have basic script or score for making decisions, even if it applies to the next 2 or 3 years, you're going to end up in a different place than I will and than other rivals will. So all of that makes sense, but much like in music, what matters at the end is not the score that we're reading from, but the talent and the capabilities of the musicians.
Dr. Tomas Chamorro-Premuzic is an international authority in people analytics, talent management, leadership development, and the human-AI interface. He is the Chief Innovation Officer at Manpower Group, co-founder of Deeper Signals and Metaprofiling, and a professor of business psychology at both the University College of London and Columbia University. He has previously held academic positions at New York University and the London School of Economics, and has lectured at numerous top universities, including Harvard Business School, Stanford Business School, London Business School, Johns Hopkins, IMD, and INSEAD, as well as being the CEO at Hogan Assessment Systems. Dr. Tomas has published 10 books and over 200 scientific papers, making him one of the most prolific social scientists of his generation. He's also a frequent contributor to Fast Company, The Guardian, Forbes, and Harvard Business Review. His latest book is I, Human: AI, Automation, and the Quest to Reclaim What Makes Us Unique. In this podcast, he outlines the link between diversity and ROI. He lays out why many organizations fail to identify talent effectively and develop it. And then he shares how AI and data analytics are going to change how organizations in the future select, develop, and manage talent. Ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Tomas Chamorro-Premuzic. Tomas, thank you so much for being here with us. It's great to have you on the podcast.
Thank you for inviting me.
I've got so many questions to go through. We don't have enough time to go through all of them, so I'm just going to jump right in. I'm going to open up with 2 questions that I ask all of our guests. The first is just to get us to know you a little bit personally. Could you complete the sentence for me? If you really know me, you know that.
I am a soccer addict, or football, as we call it in Argentina, where I'm from. And I always say psychology was my second, third, or fourth career choice. The first one, of course, was I wanted to be a soccer player. And as we record this, it's great times because my country, Argentina, just won the World Cup. We could do a whole session on that, but I'm sure your listeners prefer to talk about strategy.
Oh my gosh, yeah. I got to see them play in Qatar, not the final. Then I was in Bangladesh. If we take a little tangent, how would you characterize what the meaning of this win is for the country?
If I had to characterize it or describe it with one word, I think heroic or poetic. You know, you are a soccer fan yourself and you have been in places where people are crazy about this. But I think to see what it means, there's just nothing rational that can describe the feeling and the sense of togetherness and craziness, which of course begs the question of the limits of rationality and irrationality, etc. But I think for me, I'm 47. I was, 3 years old when Argentina won the first World Cup, then 11 on the second. So I have good memories of the 11 one, not so much the first one, which also happened or coincided with a brutal military dictatorship in Argentina. To wait 30 plus years and see this now with my kids in the country and have 5.5 million people out in the streets. I mean, you know, it's just a very, very nice and special moment in time that you will never forget. And I think people are still on this high following this victory, which also happened in an amazing and very unpredictable way as well.
Yeah, you couldn't have written the drama that led to that victory any better than what actually unfolded.
Exactly. And look, I think one of my main professional interests is talent and leadership. And if you look at this from a perspective of Messi, our captain and main player, it's so interesting. I had written about his inability to develop into a leader in 2014 when we lost the final in that World Cup. And now with far more limited remains of talent and physical fitness, energy, energy, etc. He has grown and developed as a leader and was able to drive his team to victory, which is, I think, the key piece. It's hard for me to disentangle it from my professional interests, because you can talk about strategy and culture and team effectiveness, etc. But fundamentally, the leadership and the talent part are really remarkable and a really good lesson for people who don't want to give up wherever they are, and no matter who they are, because I think that is the lesson.
I'm not following my script here because you bring up something I think is really fascinating. So you were an Argentine that lives in the UK, and he's an Argentine that lived for most of his life in Spain. For him, it was identifying the talent, that there was a club in Spain that identified him very early as having huge potential. And a lot of your work is identifying talent. So what's the lesson there? What is about the football system? What can we learn about identifying talent?
Oh, yeah. It's a very nice case study. We need to think about these things holistically, and there are all these different pieces, right? But yeah, if we want to understand Messi as the phenomenon, yes, of course, it starts with a clear strategy. So the Barcelona of the 90s had a strategy that was to bet on potential, identify people not based on what they have done in the past, but what they could do in the future. Bring them along very, very early, in fact, ridiculously early, because this boy was imported to Barcelona at the age of 12 or 13. And he had, all these hormonal deficiencies and muscular and physical problems. But fundamentally, what developed him was not the treatment, but the immersion in the system of values and beliefs and breeding the Barcelona DNA, which was also being shaped and developed at the time. So that's when you get the culture, right? And so if we're still repeating Peter Drucker's famous culture eats strategy for breakfast line today, it's because that's how strategies go to fail mostly. And here it's the culture with the talent and the strategy that came together, and that also created and made Guardiola, the Barcelona manager, and accounted for all of that. So what was interesting for all these years was whether you could re-extract Messi from the Barcelona culture and that system and that strategy and that ecosystem of talent and put him in a fundamentally individualistic and chaotic organization like the Argentine national team and expect results. And that wasn't happening. So he had to find different ways and, if you like, change his strategy for succeeding. And it just about worked out after several attempts. And, I think more through sweat and perspiration than through cerebral execution.
Yeah. So, I'm trying to relate this now to a corporate context. And, you've written a lot about the difference between managers and leaders. And I think that strategy officers, they have to float between those two people often. They can have a very long-term visionary conversation with leadership team, and then they might need to move towards execution with the manager. What's your definition, the difference between leaders and managers?
This is a great question. I am in the camp that does distinguish between managers and leaders, perhaps mostly because we've accustomed to some basic differences between the two. I think when we talk about somebody who is in a leadership role, we talk about somebody who has more senior responsibilities, who has to contribute more to strategy design than execution, and who achieves by managing other managers, and who should be more focused on working on the business and on the long-term objectives. Even if we just accept the fact that you start as an individual contributor, then become a supervisor, then become a manager, then a manager of managers, then a leader, senior leader, and executive, there are these different levels of a hierarchy that are there. Now, psychologically, it is also true that people are either more inclined to think strategically or tactically. And I think this is a valid distinction. So, you and I might be individual contributors with no managerial responsibilities, but maybe you gravitate towards the big picture. You connect the dots, you think long term, and that makes you more strategic. And maybe I have a knack for very detailed, process driven, in the weeds, granular, tactical execution. And that makes me more of a tactical thinker. I think this distinction is useful, but I do think that what organizations really need, and perhaps are starved of, is people who can connect both things. People who can actually translate strategy into execution, who can navigate or move comfortably from the strategic end of the spectrum to the tactical end of the spectrum. And unfortunately, I think when we think about chief strategy officers or people who are in a strategy role, they are still associated too much with being in the big picture and engaging in metaphysical ruminations and being too disconnected from operations and from executions, etc. So if there's any developmental recommendation for most people in those roles is pay attention to the details. Don't be lazy. Don't be sloppy. Understand the value of disciplined, rigorous process and connect with the people who are at the forefront of driving the execution of strategy, because otherwise you're just going to be seen like a crazy guru or philosopher who is a waste of time and a cost rather than a value to the organization.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. It's often advised for people in really any support role is to do a tour of duty, to have credibility, understand the complications of actually executing. So you both have credibility and your recommendations are sound.
Exactly. And I think part of the problem is that for the past 30 or 40 years, strategy has become really a treasured topic in business schools where you get a lot of professors teaching it without having that first line experience of being at the forefront of that. So it becomes a very theoretical subject, and it's the models chasing reality as opposed to realities building those models.
Gotcha. So I'd like to refocus towards talent strategy. Let's say like talent, organizational capability, whatever you want to call that, as part of the strategy objectives, right? So it seems like a key success factor is your ability to identify the future Messis early, those who can evolve from manager to leader. My theory is, A, for an organization to really have success over the long term, you need to be able to identify, develop talent over the long term early on. And the second one is, if that's true, then what are you looking for?
Yeah, great question. So it helps me to think about organizations as systems where their main function is to make decisions. So if you think about an organization as a system that makes decisions, what's important is to understand how one system differs from another. I don't want to bore people with the soccer metaphor, but Barcelona is a different decision-making system than Real Madrid. Manchester United is different from Chelsea, and so on and so on. And the same comes if we're comparing Google with Microsoft or your small business with my small business. And that's why strategy is so important, because strategy for me is not just deciding what to do, but also what not to do. And ultimately, if you have basic script or score for making decisions, even if it applies to the next 2 or 3 years, you're going to end up in a different place than I will and than other rivals will. So all of that makes sense. But much like in music, what matters at the end is not the score that we're reading from, but the talent and the capabilities of the musicians. If you think about talent management strategy, the reason why leadership is so important is because, well, as McKinsey noted 25 years ago, the people that are more senior in our organization obviously are more responsible for exponentially high proportion of results, profits, revenues, inventions, etc. And that's not so much through being a highly skilled individual, but for having the ability to coordinate the collective activities of other highly skilled individuals. So therefore, your impact on the system is a lot higher if you are in charge of others, if you're a senior leader. And yes, it helps to identify the future leaders early, because then you can also develop them and help them prepare and immerse themselves in the culture, but also shape the culture in the future. But fundamentally, what really, really matters is having talent philosophy, having also a strategy for how you reward people, what you reward, what you see as talent. And now I can answer the second part of your question, which is, on the one hand, attributes that organizations should look for don't change that much. In general, organization systems and societies are better off if they hire people into leadership roles when they are competent, when they're smart, when they're curious, when they're honest, when they have people skills, when they're coachable, and when they're humble. That's the same in Bangladesh as Argentina and the United States, Switzerland, or Sweden. But at the same time, where we still need to improve is to de-emphasize the importance of hard skills, knowledge, and expertise, and focus much more on the soft skills, right? I mean, it's interesting that today there's so much global attention and mainstream discussion on the evolution of AI, whether it's ChatGPT or other tools. And I think there is big impact and consequences here, because what does it mean to be a smart leader or a smart individual in an age where machines are smarter than us, at least when it comes to managing information, answering questions, and acquiring or managing knowledge? What's left for us to do is the soft skills part of the equation, is to empathize with others, is to show appreciation for others, is to manage ourselves and other people and how we work together, because that's something that machines are not going to be able to to substitute for, at least in the short term. So I think any organization, small, medium, or large, in whatever industry they are and in any kind of sector, needs to focus more on identifying future leaders based on these soft skills and developing the human in the organization rather than the technical expert or subject matter leader.
I love that. It reminds me of one of my favorite books I've read over the last few years is this book called Range by David Epstein. He's a sports writer. He talks about Tiger Woods versus Roger Federer. Tiger Woods very early on specializes. Roger Federer, his first sport is soccer. Tom Brady's first sport, the great American football player, was baseball. If these soft skills are really what's important as opposed to the hard capabilities, what is, in your experience, the right mechanism to identify those? Because I know that you talk about, for example, governments are, we elect our leaders through elections. There are hierarchies. There are communities. There could be like an internal marketplace. And what's the best mechanism for spotting, making the right talent decisions?
When it comes to organizations with professional HR teams or people tasked with identifying, selecting, and developing future leaders, it should really be quite different from a democratic election in a country. What's been happening, sadly, in democratic elections throughout the world, not just the Western world, is that it is more and more complex to understand politics and the landscape of leadership, and therefore people become lazier and lazier, and they want to invest, 30 seconds watching a televised presidential debate and decide who they would like to have a drink with or who they should trust. And the result is clear and we don't need to dwell over it. But unfortunately, there are too many parallels with this system when it comes to organizations. Organizations want to interview candidates and they want to decide after a poorly structured or designed interview whether somebody is honest or not, competent or not. And what should be happening is we should be using data-driven tools, whether that's traditional validated psychometric assessments or internal data that companies have, or more technologically infused methods like analytics, artificial intelligence, to detect, for example, if somebody has empathy, if somebody has emotional intelligence, if somebody has the right skills to collaborate, and even if somebody has values that are compatible with a culture or not. All of these things, we assume, can be inferred through just overt, intuitive behaviors. But unfortunately, I cannot look at you as I am doing right now and determine whether you have expertise in strategy, whether you are curious, whether you are a crook or honest or not. And although there's no rocket science-like or objective way to do it with any technology, it is far more reliable to do it using data and tools that have been validated through academic or scientific means than through intuition. In a way, we should expect countries to do the same when they elect their people. I mean, the closest I can think of is Singapore, which is an anomaly when it comes to systems, etc. But in Singapore, you take assessments very, very early on in your life at the age of 5, 6, or 7. And then if you meet the requirements, both cognitively, intellectually, and from a personality standpoint, you will work for the government when you grow up. Granted, a lot of people might listen to this and say, oh my God, this is like Orwellian Big Brother society. Well, if you rather have a dysfunctional democracy, feel free to do that. But at least this is a system that works, is predictable. And although we might not like the dictatorial nature of it or the unconventional top-down approach to that, it certainly produces better results and KPIs by traditional standard than most systems. So anyway, I'm just throwing this out to be provocative, but it could happen.
Yeah. They also pay their public sector workers proper market wages, right?
And if they steal, they punish them severely. They don't let them go on the speaking circuit or celebrate them.
Good point. Let's dig a little bit more into data because you have tons of experience on taking data to make more accurate people decisions. There's more data, right? There's more ability, IoT devices, data. We can track people's movements and what they click on. We can use analytics. So if that continues, my question is, how do you see the prevalence, availability, and the ability to process and create insights from data that advances? How is that going to change the workplace?
So technologies are mostly useful to harness data. They're vehicles for capturing data. And then AI or any statistical mining tool is useful for translating that data into insights. Where humans come in is when it gets to deciding what to do with those insights. And I think that's where a lot of organizations are stuck today. They're sitting on wealth and vast data. They're awash of data. And sometimes they have insights. Now there is a proliferation of dashboards and everybody wants to look at fancy charts and good visualizations. But if it doesn't move the needle when it comes to action, then we're stuck where we were, right? And this applies to talent. Lots of organizations have fancy systems and applicant tracking systems and softwares and analytics to decode talent. But if you then still make intuitive decisions and hire the person you like or your cousin, then you're not fundamentally changing. So I think the interesting and exciting thing about technology and data is not technology per se or data per se, but whether we have the humility and self-criticism to challenge our instincts and fundamentally turn right when our instincts tell us to go left. This has happened with Waze and Google Maps. If you think about in the early days of GPS, you might think, oh my God, I'm not going to follow the satellite navigator because I know this well. But once you get lost several times, you realize you better pay attention to the technology. In human affairs and in organizations, it's harder to do this. I mean, you can imagine a future in which AI drives and designs strategy, but we're still reluctant to believe that that was the right thing to do because there aren't very clear-cut or objective parameters to realize that we were wrong. And then you suffer from confirmation bias and you say, oh, well, I should have done what I wanted to do anyway because this isn't the right thing, or I should have hired my cousin because this candidate who was proposed to me by AI and actually looks more diverse and counterintuitive, I don't like them anyway because, when you are tasked with judging reality, then you are conflicted. There is a conflict of interest there and you're always going to think that you were right in the first place.
10 questions that pop out of that, but let me zoom into one because you mentioned diversity. And I know that you talk about that. There is a clear ROI between diversity and organizational success or performance. I believe that, and many of our guests here have advocated that. But what's your argument? What is the linkage between diversity, whether that's ethnic, religious, cognitive, and performance?
There is a link, but it's a lot more nuanced and complicated than one would wish. First of all, if you think about organizations or teams as decision-making entities, and you accept that in today's knowledge economy, knowledge is distributed. So therefore, if you can unlock the distributed knowledge that is out there, which you do by bringing people who are different to work together, then you have an advantage because you're less likely to suffer from groupthink. Many people have said this. If everybody in the team or if two people agree, then one of them is irrelevant, right? So you want diversity of thought, diversity of opinions, diversity of backgrounds, which does overlap with all of these demographic diversity categories. I mean, you're more likely to think differently if you come from a different culture, if you grew up in a different country, if you come from different socioeconomic strata, if you're of a different age, if you have people from different ethnicities, genders, etc. Even though you and I might be of exactly the same age, ethnicity, and gender and think very differently, for some of these reasons. So that's diversity, and that's where the potential for ROI comes. But it's a lot easier to manage a group of people if they're all the same. Just think about a dimension that we rarely discuss in diversity, which is political orientation or ideology. Think about being a manager and truly believing in diversity of views. So you hire half of the people in your team who are passionate Trump supporters and the other half are passionate Biden supporters. And now think about making them work together. It's a lot harder than having everybody who, sings from the same sheet or believes in the same things. So this is why you need truly good or great leaders to create an inclusive culture in your team and in your organization that at least tolerates people when they think differently and when they don't fit in. And that's why I always find it somewhat paradoxical that organizations are simultaneously championing diversity or talking about the benefits of diversity and hiring for culture fit. If you hire for culture fit, then you're not going to have a very diverse culture. You're going to hire for sameness. And if you hire for sameness, then you're only going to have one dimension or two when you make decisions. The Irish famine happened because the whole of Ireland was betting on one crop of potatoes. And then if one potato crop gets infected with parasites, you starve. So think about now potatoes being ideas, and having a diverse range of ideas in an organization or in a team. You can hedge your bets, and you're also more likely to test and assess whether your ideas are good in a less biased way. But it will be more time consuming. It will require difficult conversations. And to reach consensus when you have people who are different, or when you have 10 people with creative ideas in a team, it's a lot harder. So yes, there is a potential ROI in diversity, but it requires good leadership, inclusive cultures, and a lot of hard work and patience.
Fascinating. Wow. Yeah. And I could see why the causes of some big downfalls of Enron or Lehman Brothers, or you could link that to this potato famine.
Exactly.
So many places we could go. We've reached the top of our time with you. I would love to talk more about AI. I'd like to talk more about data and how to overcome the wanting to go with your gut, more about diversity. You write about this. You talk about it. How can listeners here who want to learn more from you, how can they connect with you?
Yeah, so the easiest way is go to my website, which is drtomas with no h.com. So drtomas.com. And there's information and updated blogs, articles, etc. And if they want to dig a little bit deeper, my latest book, which is coming out now, is called I, Human, AI, Automation, and the Quest to Reclaim What Makes Us Unique. And it's a book about the intersection of humans and machines. So human intelligence and artificial intelligence, and what it means, not just for organizations, but also for life in general.
Oh my God. I love it. Well, thank you for the work you do. And thank you for taking some time to share it with us here, Dr. Tomas. I appreciate you being here.
Great pleasure. Thank you for giving me this opportunity and this space. It's been a great, great joy.
Thank you to our guest. Thank you to our producers, Karina Reyes and Zach Nest, our editor, and the rest of the team. If you like what you heard, please follow, download, and subscribe. I'm your host, Kai-Han Krippendorf. Thank you for listening. We'll catch you next week with another episode of Outthinkers.